God tells his child that when the ground beneath what they trusted shifts, the rock underneath them remains completely solid. The storm hit much harder than they expected. Rains fell, floods rose, and the wind battered the house, making them fear that the damage meant their foundation had crumbled. But his word says in Matthew chapter 7 that the house stood firm because it was built upon a solid rock. The trial is not proof that God left them. The storm is where his strength is revealed. And right now, as they hear these truths, he wants to place their full weight back down on the single foundation beneath their life that no storm can shatter. They can rest with him on the only thing in their life that never moves. They do not have to fix everything before they rest. They do not need to understand how the ground fell apart. The Lord does not ask them to approach him strong. He only invites them to come to him leaning, the way a tired soul leans against a wall when their own legs give out. That is permitted here. God does not mind their weight. He is there for the very burden they have been afraid to release. Leaning reveals what truly holds them. There is a moment worth pausing to see, one that just happened inside them. Something they built their entire life upon started to slip. An emotion faded. A dream shattered. A trusted person let them down. And in that same instant, they decided the failure was their own fault, that they had built their life completely wrong again, that they were never meant to stand on solid ground. But observe closely, because this is where everything shifts. The storm is not proof the foundation failed. The storm is the test that reveals at last which part of their life was bedrock and which part was only ever sand. Observe how believers actually build their own lives, since they have stood so near the building, not just the breaking. They have watched themselves lay their life on a feeling and call it faith. On the day their certainty ran wrong, they built fast. They made the plans. They prayed bold prayers. They told themselves that this time the ground would hold. And then the feeling thinned, the way feelings always do, and the structure they built on it began to tilt. A mother stakes her peace on her child's good day. And when it ends, so does her peace. A man pins his whole sense of worth to one season of success, but that success cools, and he wakes to find his identity standing on sand that is starting to run between his fingers. Someone listening rebuilt an entire faith on a single answered prayer, and when the next prayer met silence, the walls came down with it. None of that building was foolish. They were trying to find solid ground. They were simply handed the wrong material and told it was stone. Here is where the sand gets exposed. See what gets recited back to them. The moment the ground gives way, a list spoken in their own voice in the empty part of the night. They should have seen this coming. They built on the wrong foundation again. They are the kind of person whose foundations never hold. The friend who once asked how the construction was going stopped asking somewhere along the line, and the silence where the question used to be has its own weight. And the worst hour is not the collapse itself. It is the hour after, when they stand in the rubble of something they trusted and try to decide whether they have it in them to pause again. The Lord has stood in that rubble with them. He was never up on a far hill watching to see whether their structure would pass inspection. He was down in the wreckage close to the part of them that is too worn out to live another stone. There are particular hours when the ground feels least steady, and the Lord is present in every one of them. For one of them, it comes deep in the dark after the house has settled and there is no task left to keep their hands busy. And the awareness of how little is holding them up rises like water against a wall. For another, it comes the moment before. They walk into a room where people need them to be the steady one, the steady parent, the steady partner, the one everyone leans on. They square themselves in the doorway. They arrange their face into something solid. They decide to look like a person whose foundations are sound. Because the ones who depend on them are watching the surface remains and they cannot be seen. Starting to shift. The father knows what it costs them. God counts the strain it takes to look like strong, when inside they feel like a wall that is cracking. In this place they do not have to hoard the pose. Here, their surface is allowed to show the crack. And here is where their sand truly gets exposed. It is not in their loud collapse. It is in the small private accounting they do. When only God is in the room, they open the same page of pros and cons on their phone, the one they have rewritten a dozen times and never finished. They draft a difficult message, get halfway through and move it back to their drafts. They shorten their prayers because they are not sure it reaches heaven anyway. These are not the dramatic failures the world would notice. They are the quiet places where the ground beneath them has been giving an inch at a time for so long that they stopped feeling the slide and started feeling it as simply who they are. The Lord sees all of it. None of it is His verdict on them. It is only a map of where their sand has been, so that they can finally see the difference between what was always going to move and the solid rock that never moves at all. And here is God's truth about all that building they have done. It was not wasted, and it was not faithless. They were doing the most human thing there is. They were searching for a place to stand that would never shake. Their instinct was true. They were designed to rest their weight on something unyielding, and their deep hunger for solid ground is not a weakness. It is a homing signal. The issue was never that they wanted a foundation. The problem is that they were constantly given sand and told it was solid rock. They have been a faithful builder. They kept showing up too. The work kept building and raising walls for the ones they loved long after their arms had grown weak. The blame never lay in their effort. It lay in the poor materials they were given, and that no one had ever shown them the single foundation that actually holds. They must not confuse a broken situation with a broken foundation. This confusion is what has been undoing them for years. But God wants to dismantle it slowly so they can see the seam where the lie joined with the truth. Notice too how their prayers have changed within them over the long season of rebuilding. Their prayers were once full. They used to hold real words, the kind they meant, spoken with confidence, that the Lord would answer. Now on the toughest nights, it is barely a single sentence, just a quiet breath offered to the heavens. Half a word, they are not even sure matters. It counts. The Lord has caught every single one. The breath a believer thinks is too faint to be a prayer is the very one he leans closest to. Here, he never needed their eloquence to build. He only needed their weight leaning even a little in his direction. And that leaning is found in the breath. The Lord asks them to speak 3 words before they proceed, whispered so only they and the Lord hear them. Just this, I am built on rock. They do not have to believe it fully, just yet. Belief is not the entry fee. They say it like testing a wooden beam before trusting it with their full weight. Not certain it will hold, but willing to lean slightly and find out. Hearing their own voice form the words does something their silent fear cannot. Undo. It puts a true sentence into the very air that has been carrying the cracking sound. What holds them holds whether or not their voice shakes when they name it. Now the Lord wants to break a lie with them, because it has been loud and has been ruining their foundation for years. They came to believe that faith is a feeling they must keep producing, that belonging to Him means conjuring a certain warmth, a certain certainty, a certain weather inside their chests. And as long as they can manufacture the feeling the ground is solid, and the day they cannot, the ground is gone. So they have spent their lives trying to feel their way to stability. They chase the emotion and grieve when it fades. They view its absence as His absence, and they start to wonder if they ever had any foundation at all. They have built their whole house on the most shifting material in all creation, the moods of a human heart, and then blamed themselves when the house would not stand still. See how the sand gives way in plain daylight. Consider for a moment how differently a person lives depending on what they believe is holding them up. If they believe their standing depends on a feeling they must keep producing, then every flat day is a threat and every gray season is a danger, and they spend their strength working the feeling back up so the ground feels solid again. But if they know the ground beneath their weight is stone, that same gray day becomes survivable. They can stand on stone feeling nothing at all and still be standing, because standing was never about the feeling. Nothing about the weather of their heart has changed. What changes is whether they believe there is anything beneath the weather, and that single belief changes everything about how the storm lands on them. Faith was never a feeling they generate. Faith is a place they stand. The version of God they were handed wants them to believe He is pleased with them only when their faith is loud, only when the feeling runs high, only when they work themselves up into absolute certainty, and that He draws back disappointed on gray days, when a believer only has a tired, half-doubting trust that barely keeps its footing. He is not like that. He does not grade the intensity of their devotion. He once made it clear that faith the size of a tiny seed is enough for Him to move mountains with, not because their faith is powerful, but because of the one they lean on. A tiny hand resting on solid stone is steadier than a strong hand gripping nothing. He never asked for the strength of their grit. He asked for the rightness of their ground. They take a slow breath now, the kind that goes all the way down. As they exhale, they let their focus drop to the soles of their feet, to the simple truth of the ground holding them up right now without any effort from them at all. They did not create that ground. They are not straining to keep it under them. It is simply there bearing their weight, the way it has all along, while they were too busy bracing to notice. They let their feet press down for one breath, remembering that they do not generate the ground. They receive it. The rock holds before they feel steady. And here is what the lie stole from them most. It told them that on days they cannot feel Him, they are not standing on anything. But bedrock does not stop holding them on. The days they cannot feel it, the ground beneath their weight bears them, whether or not they are thinking about it. So much of what they mistook for falling was simply them standing on something, standing steady while feeling nothing, and believing that the absence of that feeling meant the floor had disappeared. The unshaken place was there the entire time. They were standing on it, even as they grieved its supposed loss. The rock is not how steady they feel. The rock is what holds them. One must be completely honest and clear about what building on this foundation does and does not mean, since many have probably been sold a cheap and deceptive counterfeit. Standing on this foundation is not a promise that storms will never come. It is not a guarantee that provisions will arrive by a specific date, calendar, that medical tests come back clean this month, that opportunities open on the schedule they made, or that the person they await finally walks back in. The voices offering those false promises with deadlines are not actually building on rock. They are selling another patch of sand and calling it bedrock. And when that deadline fails, trust in God should not collapse into the same hole. Their promise did. The house on the rock still faces the storm. The rain still falls on it. The flood still rises against it. What the rock guarantees is not a life without any storms. It is a life that does not collapse in the storm. Do not miss this, because it is the hinge the entire picture turns on. The house was not spared the storm. It was held through it. Two houses faced the exact same storm. One collapsed, but the other stood firm. And the difference was never the severity of the tempest. The difference was the foundation. And this is why believers must stop viewing their hardest seasons as proof of failure. Faith is not a manufactured feeling. It is the solid ground of truth. When the winds roared, the wise builder did not feel bolder than the foolish one. He did not conjure up greater courage. The moment the rising waters rushed in, he simply realized when the trial came that the ground beneath his feet had been prepared long before the rain ever showed itself on the distant horizon. The preparation that saved his home was done quietly, on a completely normal day, with no dark clouds in sight. When he chose to dig deep and labor, that hidden effort was what nobody saw. Yet it was the factor that decided everything. Now let us reflect on the promise he delivered. It is helpful to visualize where he first spoke these words to his followers, because those words did not come from a comfortable sanctuary full of perfect people whose lives were already held together. He preached it standing on a hillside to a massive crowd that traveled a long way to hear him. Simple fishermen with calloused hands, tired mothers with children on their hips, weary souls taxed, ignored and cast aside, told their entire lives that they were never going to find a solid, steady foundation. They were not religious scholars. They did not gather for a deep lecture on construction. They gathered because their lives kept falling apart, and they were desperate to find out if anything would hold. He did not say this to impress the comfortable. He spoke to those standing in the ruins of their own efforts who needed to know there was a solid foundation that would never betray them. Let's say it slowly together. This is what he told them. Matthew chapter 7 verses 24 and 25. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them is like a wise builder who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell and floods rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not collapse, because its foundation was on the rock. Let's walk through this together, because every single word is for you. Look first at what makes the wise builder wise. It was not about feeling more. He was not stronger, more confident, or more certain or better at conjuring faith out of his own chest. The difference between the wise builder and the foolish one is not the size of the house or the depth of their feelings. It is one thing only what they built on. Two people heard the exact same words. One let those words become the ground he stood on, while the other kept them as a nice idea he admired and walked away from hearing these words and doing them. not perfecting them, not just feeling strongly about them, doing them, letting them become the floor beneath his everyday life. That is the only difference. And that single difference is the whole reason one house stood and one house fell. Now look at what he did not say, because it matters just as much as what he did. The stone did not create the weakness. It revealed the sand. He never said the wise man's house was spared the stone. Read it again. The rain fell on the wise man's house too. The floods beat against it and winds battered it just as hard as they beat on the house that collapsed. The storm was identical. Both houses faced the same weather. He never promised the rock would keep the rain away. What he promised is the last line. It did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. That is the whole miracle. Not a life with no floods, but a life that does not sink when the flood waters rise. The people on that hillside did not need a God who promised them clear skies. They needed a foundation that would hold. When the skies open, so do you. And do not miss the doing, because it is the path you have been most afraid of. Doing these words is not about performing them perfectly. It is not about climbing some standard you keep slipping down from. To do them is simply to dig, to drive a spade of your trust down, past the shallow surface of your feelings, past the easy topsoil of a good mood, and keep digging until you strike something that does not give. It is harder, slower, unglamorous work. Anyone can pour concrete on the sand in an afternoon and have it look like a house by evening, but digging to bedrock takes longer and shows less. Yet the one who digs is the one still standing when the flood waters hit the wall. The deep change they have begged him for in their hearts is not a feeling he drops into them from above. It is a deeper foundation being dug and laid, one day at a time, beneath a life that has been built on sand. There is more he has built into his word for them about this stone, and he will not read it to them as a separate text, but lets it stand underneath this one as they listen. Long before that hillside, he promised through one of his prophets that he was laying a solid stone in the world, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone for a secure foundation, and that the one who trusts in it will never be put to shame, never be shaken loose, never have to flee in panic. And in the songs of a hunted king, when everything around him was caving in, he did not call him his feeling or his good fortune. He called him his rock, his fortress, the solid place he ran to when the ground everywhere else was failing. That is the same ground he is offering them now. Not a mood that comes and goes, a rock, a fortress, a tested cornerstone. The one place a person can put their whole weight and never be let down. And they did. Now hear what makes all of this trustworthy, because it cost something to lay. The rejected stone became the cornerstone. His son was treated as useless by the builders, cast aside by those who thought they knew what would hold. But the stone they rejected became the foundation of the entire house. He went down into the deepest flood, into death itself, and emerged unbroken. That is why the rock beneath them will never move. It has already been tested by the worst storm creation could bring, and it held. The cornerstone has already faced the deepest flood and stood firm. So when the water rises against their house, they are not standing on a theory. He asks them to hope will work. They are standing on a stone that has already been to the bottom of the worst flood in existence and returned back up. The storm can expose sand, but it cannot crack Christ. Looking back now at the place where they started, when they stood in the rubble, Satan, the collapse was a verdict on them. Here is the answer he promised. They have been reading the crack as proof that they built wrong, that they are not the kind of person whose life holds, that the failure is a sentence with their name on it. But the crack is not running through the rock. It is running through the sand they were never meant to stand on in the first place. What is giving way is supposed to give way. Feelings are sand. Circumstances are sand. Outcomes are sand. People can become sand when they are asked to carry the weight only God can carry. Christ's words are rock. Christ himself is the cornerstone. The storm does not prove the foundation failed. The storm reveals what the foundation was. None of the sand was ever the foundation, and the fact that it is failing is not the rock failing. It is the sand being shown for what it always was, so that they would finally take their weight off it and set it down where it belongs. So, the Lord gives them something small to carry into the rest of their week, and they do not have to do it well for it to work. When the next thing shifts, ask, what am I standing on right now? Then answer, this is sand and the rock is still under me. They do not have to scramble to rebuild their faith on the spot. They do not have to manufacture a stronger emotion. They only have to notice the question underneath the panic, which is always the same question, and answer it with that one true line low enough that only he hears it. Then take one breath and let their weight come off the thing that is moving and onto the thing that is not. They are built on rock, not ruin. And never confuse a cracked circumstance with a cracked foundation. This is the single mistake that has cost them the most peace. So they hold it to the light once more before stepping back into their busy week. When life circumstances crack, it feels like the floor is dropping out. Because for years they let that circumstance serve as their floors. But the cornerstone has already faced the deepest flood and stood firm. And that is not where the crack spreads. The crack runs through the fragile things they leaned upon instead. So when panic whispers to them that everything is falling apart, they can reply with one gentle truth. A part of their life is cracking, but the foundation beneath them is unshaken. The first is only shifting sand, acting just like sand behaves. The second is the solid rock, doing exactly what it has always done. Always. There is a way to make this real, if they need it. Think of the one thing in their life that has been cracking the most lately. The anxious prayer they keep drafting in a phone note and then deleting. The outcome they keep checking on. The relationship they keep worrying over so much. That struggle is real, and the ache around it is real. Yet they are not asked to pretend the crack is not there. They are only invited to name it simply for what it is. This is sand, not a judgment against themselves for building on it. Just an honest look at the ground. Calling the sand what it is the first spade of dirt out of the way. This is how the digging begins. And here lies the quiet, strange mercy of this practice. A believer does not have to feel steady before they begin. The order they have tried to live by is completely backward. They have believed they must first feel the ground before they can trust it. That the steadiness comes first and then standing follows. But the cornerstone does not wait for human confidence before it holds. It held the wise man's house in the hour his faith was thinnest. So they do not generate the ground. They receive it. They let their weight fall upon what is already there before any feeling arrives to confirm it. and the stability when it comes at all comes later as a quiet byproduct of having stood. One builds on stone, not on the strength of how convinced they happen to feel today, and they must not be discouraged by how slow the foundation is to feel solid, because foundations are always the part of the work that nobody sees and nobody applauds. They will not feel the rock the way they felt the easy ground of a good moon. Bedrock does not flatter a person the way sand does. It does not rush to meet their feelings. It just holds quietly underneath, whether they are admiring it or not. The reassurance one used to get from a strong emotion will not come the same way from bedrock, and at first they may even mistake its steadiness for coldness the way solid ground feels less exciting than a wave. They must stay anyway. The thrill of the wave is exactly what puts them in the water with nothing under their feet. The steadiness of the rock is what will. It remains there when the wave is long gone. They may feel nothing the first time they seek him. The fifth time might feel like talking to themselves. But after they have faced enough collapses, by naming the sand and finding the rock, still there, something inside them that has lived braced. For the next fall will begin, almost without their noticing the moment, to unclench. A part of them that has spent years shut, it was standing on nothing, will slowly start to feel the floor it was on the whole time. They will catch themselves meeting a hard day without the old vertigo. They will notice that the storm came and they did not go down with it. They will forget this. The old habit will snap back, and they will catch themselves pouring their much weight onto sand again before they even realize they have stepped off the rock. That is all right. The rock did not move when the ground shifted. And it does not move on the days they forget it is there. It is not a discipline they have to perform perfectly to keep it solid under them. It is a truth they are slowly learning to rest their weight on. और दुहों फरमत करते हैं, मत को कर shift. Whenever they notice the vertigo, they can simply stop, take their weight off the sand, and feel for the stone that is not gone anywhere. There may even be a strange grief in coming off the sand, but God wants them to. They know that is normal too. The shifting ground was familiar. Bracing for the next collapse felt like being prepared. Chasing the feeling felt like being faithful. So when they finally let their weight settle onto something that does not move, a part of them may miss the scramble. How a person can miss a burden simply because they carried it so long. Their shoulders forgot any other shape. They let that pass. They can stop bracing without losing their footing, because their footing was never their own effort to begin with. It was the rock. And the rock was holding them even on the days they were sure they were about to fall. And on the days no words will come, they let their breath carry it. They let one long breath go all the way out, slower and emptier than they usually allow. And they let that exhale be their entire prayer. The rock does not lean on how well they pray any more than it leans on how strongly they feel. It holds because of what it is not, because of what they bring to it. They can stand on it on their weakest day, exactly as surely as on their strongest, because the holding was never their worth. It was always the ground's. They do not measure how solid their foundation is by how the storm is going. The storm is weather. The rock is underneath it, and the rock does not move when the weather turns. A heartquake is not the ground giving way. A terrifying season is not the floor giving way. when everything feels completely uncertain, is not the foundation cracking. It is simply sand failing as sand does while the stone beneath them bears their full weight without strain, just as it did the whole time they were sure they were falling. The rock stands. Their hard storm did not crack it. Their deepest collapse never reached it. The flood waters rose, but the house did not fall. The sand washed away, but Christ was not shaken. The cornerstone emerged from the grave, unbroken. They are built on rock, and that rock never moves. Amen. If this devotional reached those who have been standing in the ruins of what they trusted, leave the word rock in the comments below. Pinned just above the 7 short letters with one for each of the next 7 days, crafted for the heart that keeps building on sand. Read them. Share this with those whose ground has been shifting right under their feet, and subscribe so the next word reaches them.